Obviously, as we've talked about several times throughout the past 3 days, 25-point reform was the #1 issue that you all asked that we have several discussions about. So this panel is something we put together to give you a sense of what some various government executives' thoughts are with regards to 25-point reform and what they're doing. It's titled Tools and Strategies to Help You Support the 25-Point IT Management Reform Initiative with Limited Resources. I'll go ahead and introduce the panelists. First up, Benjamin Bergeson, to my far right, CIO of the Office of the Inspector General at Commerce. Benjamin is a best-selling author, speaker, and subject matter expert in IT business transformation, IT governance, strategy, architecture, and information security management. He is the CIO for the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Commerce, where he transforms technology services to provide enhanced collaborative services for mission, security, and assurance. To my right is Brack Bowler, the Director of IT Compliance at Transportation. Brack is the Director of IT, as I mentioned, and still serves in his former capacity as the Capital Planning and Investment Control Lead for the department, where he helps manage a $3+ billion portfolio across 12 operating administrations. Mr. Bowler has been with the department since 2009. Prior to that, he was the Capital Planning Lead for Pension Benefit Guarantee. Pat Donovan is in the middle right here to my left. He is the CTO at the Office of Integrated Technology Services within the General Services Administration Federal Acquisition Service. As the ITS CTO, Mr. Donovan ensures the strategic alignment of enterprise-wide implementation efforts, provides expert guidance and insight on the ITS approach to increase customer accessibility to cutting-edge IT solutions, and monitors unique technology needs and requirements of ITS. Dr. Jim Rolfe is the Chief Architect and leads, he is the Chief Enterprise Architect at the Department of Interior, where he leads the Architecture and Engineering Division. He has led numerous large-scale cross-organizational planning activities and supported innovative approaches leading to best management practices. John Sullivan, I believe I have the wrong bio for him. John, what is your current official title?
I'm the Director of an Architecture and Technology Strategy Group for Government-Wide Policy.
There you go. You want a minute bio, or is that good?
That's enough.
All right. See, he's a friend, so when I make a mistake, it's okay. And last but not least is our moderator, Phil Wenger. It's right over here. Phil is the Deputy Policy Lead for the Budget Formulation and Execution line of business at OMB. Phil serves in multiple roles at OMB and has spent the last several years developing partnerships and building a platform of technology services that is being used across the federal government. He's passionate about sharing technology and expertise across federal agencies and is eager to recruit partners in his effort to improve the effectiveness of federal IT professionals. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Phil to get things going.
Thank you, Carl. Good morning. So I got John's cell phone here for the timer, but it's locked me out, so we'll get this.
Sorry, technical. I'll keep time.
We'll get this. So how was the party last night? Everybody have a good time?
Yeah.
The panelists had a good time? We're going to wake you guys up as we go here. I've got the 25 points kind of sitting off to the side. We're not going to talk to them specifically, but I know we've talked a lot this week about the 25, heard this couple days about the 25-point plan. We don't have a copy of it in front of you, so I want you to be able to kind of have a sense as to what it is we're talking about. I know you've mostly read it. I know you've all read it. The 25-point plan came from really a lot of feedback from the industry and from government to Vivek in his role as chief architect, and his office putting together a roadmap for kind of moving forward for the next 18 months. Some of these things are, I say, motherhood and apple pie. Some of these things are very, common sense and straightforward, and we all agree to them. Some of these things may have some specific goals attached to them that make some of us nervous. So I'm going to ask the agency folks to tell us a little bit about their views and their approaches to this thing, and then I'm going to give you guys some time to come back with some questions. So, and my notes are small, so I'm going to be putting my reading glasses on. Tell me a little bit about how your agency is approaching the 25-point plan specifically related to light technologies and shared services. And I'm going to start with Patrick.
Well, I mean, most, as in, GSA, our approach is, finding out what government agencies need. And that's what we're trying to do. In light technologies, mobility is a big one, but as, we were talking about the 25-point plan before, not a lot of this we see is new. I mean, a lot of it's articulating things that government's been trying to do or that's been going on in the technology world, but we're trying to enable agencies to do that. So, I mean, that's our biggest approach is what do agencies need to do it? What are, industry willing to offer, or what do they think would benefit the government? So our approach is more of solutions and how we best can serve government.
John, anything?
Move this mic around here. I definitely ditto the fact that the plan is just pulling together rational pieces that need to be focused on, and there's nothing new other than the intention, and intention is good. With it, though, what I see all of this is the schism between, doing something, defining the enterprise as the federal government versus smaller enterprises. And sometimes the enterprises are vertical. Some agencies have a lot more going on with states and local, and that's their enterprise. And when you try to do something, and so what I think that the 25-point plan is trying to do is to say, how do we collectively do this? And particularly as you get into the shared services and that whole push, which is about doing things together. And yet we all know things like the Exhibit 300 work best if you're in a stovepipe and you control everything in your own little world. You control the risk, you control the security, you know. That's the way certainly the previous 300s read. And that's the kind of the schism here, is if we're going to do things together, well, that changes our planning teams, and I think that changes what we think of an integrated project team. We have to trust people, and that's tough sometimes. And and not only that, we have to assume things about budgets and funding that may not be reality. So that's what I think the plan is, and I'm part of the government-wide policy group here, and so the question is on the table is to actually do this and do cross-agency things. Where is our current policy infrastructure an obstacle? And so what do we need to change? And then where is something we just don't have any policy direction on? And what we're going to run into is who owns the data? Who's the authoritative source on what data? And if we're really going to start sharing it, and we all know it still needs to be clean, and we need to have, somebody needs to be on first. And so we need to get to that place here. And that's a lot of what we do in OGP, is to start looking under the table at some of those data issues.
I think there are a couple of things that are worth noting, and Phil hit on it a little bit at the beginning, is where the 25-point plan comes from. I've heard over the last couple of days and even longer, a lot of discussion about the 25-point plan, and there's a fair amount of anxiety, I think, about it, about how we're going to achieve it, what it means. And I think it's worth just reinforcing the idea that where the 25-point plan came from, or at least in part, was in conversations that Vivek had with the agencies. So Phil mentioned, he went out, he spoke with industry, he spoke with government, he asked us, the leaders, our leaders, us and our leaders, what needs to be fixed, what is the attention. And so I think the way we look at the 25-point implementation plan is a tool to focus energy on fixing a lot of the problems that have been pervasive for a long time. And in this first category, I think it's worth noting that there's been a lot of attention. Vivek has certainly been pushing us all to move to cloud. There's been a lot of attention to cloud, and one of the big things here is cloud first. But it's not cloud only. It strengthens the idea of shared services and moving in that direction, which I think many of us architects certainly are very much in support of. but it's doing it in a measured way. And so it does require us at DOI, what we do is we look at everything, and we do it formally as a candidate for cloud. Is this something that's viable for moving to the cloud? And in the plan, they talk about, can you do it securely, reliably, and cost effectively? And so those are considerations for moving to cloud. And there are some things, and I'm not going to belabor the point because we've talked about it quite a bit this week, but there are some things that fit that mold today, and there are some things that don't fit that mold today, but we hope will in the future. And so I think moving to that future state, asking that question, that very simple question of, is this something that fits within the context of Cloud First today? And if not, how can we move it there? Just the mere fact that we have this tool, the 25-point plan, that focuses our attention on that is a useful tool. It gets some of DOI is a highly federated, decentralized organization, and for us to be able to point back to something that says, we as a government are moving in this direction, it's not just a DOI initiative, it's broader than that, I think it's a very useful tool. And that's how we have some other specific initiatives in terms of data center consolidation. All of us are working on those kinds of things. But I think that's a really useful way of looking at the plan, not just in terms of this first section, but more broadly.
Okay, well, that brings us to the next one, which is data center consolidation, cloud. Are there specific things that your agencies are doing in this area? Any lessons learned at this kind of early stage?
Well, at least, for GSA, there's two parts learned, like our own internal lessons learned. And certainly a big aspect of that was, knowing what you already have. And that's huge. GSA only has about 6 or so data centers, so it's not a big effort, but there's agencies a lot more. And finding all those different places, what is the definition of a data center? So those are the things, but also I think what we learned was that, how we were traditionally offering our solutions to the government didn't fit anymore as technologies evolve and what you can now do with virtualization and all the different services. So part of that, like GSA's approach is, hey, how can we make it easier for agencies to move there and what type of services are there? So, we've been focusing on putting those solutions together. And again, the services already did there, industry already has them, but it's defining them by if you're a data center manager or your CIO, how do you order those things? And making it easier to do that versus maybe going through SINs or things like that on a contract and saying, hey, is this really what I need or not? So that's the biggest thing that, we were learning is that how is the customer going to buy these things as they move in that general direction?
Okay, thanks. I want to start with these guys over here a little bit and ask about the role of enterprise architects in achieving these efficiencies.
What we're doing at DOT is this initiative is giving us some push to revitalize our EA program. It hasn't been as upfront as it should have been for many years, so this gives us an opportunity to revitalize it, put it back where it needs to be. What we're hoping to use this for also is to tease out all of the embedded infrastructure and IT that's embedded in all the programs, because right now we can't find it. It's very difficult to get our arms around it. And so this gives us a way to architect it, find it, and start to say, now can we put things in the cloud as we peel out the layers of infrastructure? So up to now, we haven't been able to do that. And we're just like DOI. We're very federated, so everyone has their own stuff. We have a core COE that the administrations, use, but they have so much of it buried in their own programs. This is the only way we're going to get the visibility. So just like everybody said, this is a tool for us to use, but it's the only way we're ever going to be able to start throwing things into the cloud, consolidating in, and start sharing services within DOT, to start with.
Okay. John?
I probably, as much as anyone, have had people roll their eyes at me every time you bring up the architecture word. And that blank stare you get of, like, we really don't want to hear this. And so the question is, what's different? And, certainly if you follow the Gartner hype curve, architecture, and certainly the FEA has kind of hit the trough of disillusionment, and then we'll surface back is what makes sense. What is rational? And I still come down to, architecture is like being on a diet. You can, you're always on some diet, and the results are obvious whether you planned them or not. So the question is, do you want to plan? And if so, the question is, and we will go to the softer, easier route, and only with pain will the world really listen. And it's not that, as we've been accused of being, an arrogant bunch of architects who we think we have all the answers, and that perception is certainly out there. But the point is, so, we've got these plans. You've got, the GAO report out there about, the huge problem of government redundancies. We're headed into a time when that will probably be a lot of discussion around that over the next couple of years. Vivek is testifying, I think it's now on the 25th, along with Danny Gordon and others, about what are we going to do on how are we going to do this. And what we've heard is that what we're coming out of the Senate committees will be, how are you using architecture to do this? So how do we have, so it's kind of like we have a little resurgence, it's like, oh, all of a sudden, who are the architects? Let's pay attention to them. And, and it is a call to us to, be pertinent and, of value at the right time, and not say we need 5 years to produce, a plan. That's not going to cut it. So I think we do have the challenge to, to say, these are what we're planning on doing, and it still comes down to that, so what are we doing inside agencies, and where do we, going back to the big enterprise, where is it that we really can stretch those borders and do true enterprise service delivery? And it's another opportunity upon us here to be pertinent and of value, but it, we have to respond.
And I've been excited the last little while watching Scott Bernard working with the enterprise architects on kind of working more and more on the government as the enterprise. That is, the architects as a architecture committee for the federal government rather than the architects as individual people reflecting their agencies. And I think that's going to make a huge difference for kind of the cloud computing, the shared services, those things that you really can't do by yourself.
And I do think we have, thanks to Randy Height, that before he left GAO, I'm assuming he's behind a lot of this press out of GAO, and hence the committee to, let's use architecture to plan how we get out of this redundant spending mess.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move on to program management and start with Benjamin. How are you guys using, how's your agency using, addressing the program management reform agenda?
We're doing NIST 853R3, which came out about a year or two ago and said there's a program management control. We've been doing this in the government for a long time. It's how you get your budget approved, it's how you do CPIC, it's how you denote your head of security. Now there's actually 11 controls that NIST came up with and said IT people should be looking at their budgets formally and formally identifying how projects are approved, when they're reviewed, and when they're canceled. So this fits in also with tech stats. If you go in and review a project and you either increase the funding or increase the schedule or cut back the scope. So we're doing those 11 controls out of NIST. You've got about a year to put them in place, and then after that you get reviewed on those. Also, what we're doing is putting in EVM Lite. If we do earned value management in depth, we could get buried in it. So we pick a couple lightweight controls and use those as markers to look at projects and see how they're performing. And we also do periodic program management reviews. So I go in as head of IT and check on projects weekly, monthly, quarterly. The Office of Secretary also comes in and reviews my projects. So a lot of these things you're already doing, it's just now they're formalized and periodic as to needing to remember to do them.
The piece that we're looking at on the IT program management reform is we're having a lot of internal conversations about the program management track, because they're talking about making it a formal thing and elevating PMs into a programmatic management role. So a lot of the conversations we're having internally is, what type of skill set is that? Is this just an opportunity to take, somebody who's a PM who's topped out and move them up into a programmatic role? So we're trying to have internal discussions about what kind of skill sets, what type of persons should this be, because we don't want to keep the 2210 track going. These aren't technologists, this is a different set of skills at a programmatic level. And Jim Rolfe has made an interesting point this morning. He said this may be the perfect opportunity to say, let's bring in contract support, short-term, heavy-hitting to, manage this program and then move on. So bring in the tools, bring in the skill sets that you need on a short-term basis, and not just move a bunch of people up to a higher level across the federal government, because they're very different skill sets. And I know for DOT, especially at the FAA level, there are some humongous programs out there, and it's a different skill set to bring next gen home than it is to do pieces of the next gen project. So we haven't got it solved yet, but we're trying to lay out the framework so that we can present that to our HR departments internally and say, don't just promote a bunch of people, bring in a different skill set and actually, bring in the management piece that we need, because we think that's sorely lacking in a lot of our instances for our projects.
Okay. Anyone else? Let's talk a little about integrated project teams. What role do the IPTs play, and what's the role of enterprise architecture in the IPTs? John, you want to start us?
It's interesting, when the plan first came out, you heard this kind of sigh across certain architecture communities of we're left out, or we're not mentioned in the plan. Certainly heard it loudly in the EA-SIG of the IAC. And the bottom line is, yeah, it would have been an opportunity had the word been put in there, but like I said, you have to, this IPT has to work under the agencies or cross-federal governance process. And there's architectural review steps that have to happen, and as things come into the IPT, now, and the IPT is written, you have to have a technical lead. There's a couple roles in there that, certainly, it all depends on how you define them, are going to have architectural context. And so just in the really traditional, you've got to have someone planning, your performance and business strategy, et cetera. You've got to have someone working on the data, and you've got to have someone working on the services and the technology. So I, for one, am not that concerned that it wasn't specifically called out in the plan. Could it have been? Sure. But, I think, these IPTs, as we start building projects, have to work within the governance framework that's out there, and that governance framework should very clearly have architectural review.
Okay.
Jim?
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. I think I agree with what John's saying, that there were a lot of architects who were disappointed in the 25-point plan, that there wasn't more explicit reference to enterprise architects. But when I read it, I got fairly excited. I saw a lot of opportunities for architecture to play a leading role. And so I guess I got to say opportunity is where you find it, and that there's a lot of opportunity here for architects and for architecture to make a difference in this. So in terms of the role with integrated project teams, the way we approach it at DOI, and this is a legacy going back certainly well before my time there, is our architects facilitate the IPTs. They play visionary roles with the organization, bringing together the partners to identify a common holistic vision and direction for the for whatever initiative they're partnering on. So, you know, when we talk about the 25-point plan, a lot of this stuff is visionary. A lot of this stuff is the big picture things that are really going to fix efforts on the ground. So I think that's really good. I think building the relationships, the connections, especially as we look at connections across agencies. One of the things that I can't remember who I was speaking with earlier this week, but we were having a conversation about architecture being a fairly small community. Many of us know each other. I know many of you came, and you know, probably a third of you we've had interactions before. So it's a fairly small community, and we do share information. And just that relationship across agencies, I think it's going to be very beneficial to the 25-point plan. So, you know, I think architects, enterprise architects, and the architecture discipline have a big role to play in this. And so, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and we should, rather than be waiting for somebody to say, architects come in, we should be looking much more aggressively about, you know, how we can come in and help pull these pieces together. I think we'll talk a little bit, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about some of the expectations of much more timely deliverables and coming out with incremental development approaches. Somebody's got to make sure that all those pieces fit together. Somebody's got to have that longer term vision, making sure that these small pieces that we put together and that we're rolling out, which is a best practice from long time gone, that they all fit into a larger framework. And I don't think that there's been a lot of attention or a lot of discussion about that larger framework, that larger perspective. But that's what architects are about. So I think it's there's a lot of role for us in the IPTs and even more broadly.
Yeah,
Thanks.
agreed. Thanks. That's going to be really important, especially with shared services and cloud and data center consolidation, where I do want to share something with you, and how can I possibly do that if we don't have an underlying architecture in mind? Brock, you have anything on program management? Okay. So we're going to move on to acquisition. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead to budget, and then I'll come back to acquisition. So the budget process doesn't always align with IT. I mean, we've all seen that. What specific challenges does the process itself pose? And I'll open that up to what specific challenges does or opportunities does the current budget scenario pose to implementing these reforms? John, you want to start us?
What comes to my mind is the gift of desperation.
That's right.
Is, you know, when sometimes that's what forces you to, you know, find a better way and start looking at, well, maybe there's something here I can use from somebody else. You know, we've been, you know, that's what we've been trying to do all along, except it's very difficult to really know what other people are doing until it's so far down the road it's too late for you to join in. And again, the reason to be planning up front with the architectures and stuff. And you know, the current rolling out of the new 53 and 300s on the investment side, it is an attempt to have a shorter time frame. And I'm not an expert on this, but it just what I know of it and where they're headed with it is, you know, the A side of the 300 and the 53 is supposed to align more directly with the budget planning and the current budget cycles. And then the rest of it, instead of being the, you know, as we all know, the you know, what used to be what I call the Ouija board numbers of, you know, what's it going to be 6-7 years from now, and I think there's going to be less emphasis on really having numbers there and more of just what's the planning direction here. So yeah, we'll see how that works. I don't know. I'm not. Many of them are probably more experts on the details of where that's going than I, but that was, I think, a recognition out of OMB and those at the support team at GSA that the current plan wasn't working, and so that's what they're trying to resolve here. But Yeah, the question is it going to be a better fit for shared services? And, and how do we do the IT cost accounting stuff around shared services? I think there's a lot of work and some discussions I've heard already here, how does this change the licensing model on a lot of the software that we have? And there's fertile ground for a lot of work still.
Yeah. And we've heard folks say before, for the folks in industry, we're changing the rules somewhat, and you're going to have to be working on what your pricing model comes up with that kind of responds to that. Anything else on budgets?
Well, I would just say one quick thing about it, that it's, one of the neat things about the 25-point plan is it isn't just the agencies. It's not just pointed at the agencies. And on this budget issue, in the conversation, certainly in the listening sessions at DOI that Vivek had, he recognized that the budget issue, the budget challenge that we have, this isn't just an IT issue. This is a budget issue across the board, but it particularly hits IT because of the rate of innovation in technology. And so, he's committed to having conversations with administration leaders and Congress to try to fix the fundamental rules that constrain us in this way. So, it's not just, how do we work within the bounds that were set, which have always been very difficult, but how do we fundamentally change those rules so that the new direction that we need to go can better be accomplished. So it's very nice to have a federal CIO who's working with us in a partnership like that and is willing to lift some of that heavy load for us.
Agreed. Anything over here? I'm going to move on to acquisition, and I'm going to turn to Patrick on this. So let's talk about the way we procure IT commodities. How do you see that changing? What's GSA's role?
Well, one of the things that, I guess is talking about innovation and the rate of change. Certainly the rate of change in the technology field keeps changing and changing. And in government, acquisition processes have difficulty keeping up with that. I mean, just inherent the competition and the rules and regulations, those things don't change very quickly. And so those are things we're trying to address. I mean, how do you have government contracts that are competed with identified items and prices, but at the same time are quickly refreshed at the rate of what new technologies are being introduced? I mean, a particular challenge you look at is like, the boom or the hyper cycle of tablets. I mean, a lot of agencies are using those, yet it's very difficult to get them for a lot of different reasons. I mean, there's TAA compliance issues and things like that. Some contracts can or cannot have them. The rules aren't necessarily up to date on that is or the intention of the TA. How does that apply to technology? Because really, what we're seeing is that technology is being driven now more by the consumers, and that's it. I mean, it's, the tablets are out there for the consumers, for everybody to use. And all of a sudden, government goes, hey, we could use that too, and we can be more efficient. So those are challenges. I mean, we're trying everything of working with the different agencies to rewrite those regulations, and also along the lines of working with industry and other agencies getting together, and how can we more strategically, say, procure these things or put contracts in place so that you have more technology refresh and these things are there. So it's difficult because we're somewhat burdened by the contracts already in place, which we're buying things for cycles much slower. So looking at things of how to maybe put BPAs in place or even more open market contracts to allow that, so that industry can offer these things to government. So because as we get this push, everything for, like we have a 25-point plan focused on technology, and we're supposed to now do all these things. How do we get those contracts? So it's a challenge. I mean, we're doing everything of trying to, more collaboration of putting websites or wikis or things like that to say, hey, how do you think we can change these things? It's difficult. So and we see it as a challenge, and we're looking forward to any comments or ideas that people have.
Okay. So governance and accountability. what are your agencies doing in this area? What tools and techniques are you using to make the processes more effective, or to move them towards better supporting these initiatives? I'm going to start. You want to start?
Sure. We're doing a few things. There's certainly in this whole topic, and we've been hearing it all week, a lot more questions than answers. And so, but one of the things that we're doing explicitly in this area is we've fundamentally changed our governance framework. And this was a big lift. And in DOI, the way our governance, our IT governance organization was structured is it was structured around small IRBs at the bureau level and then a departmental IRB. And I'm curious, from the people at the other agencies, I've spoken with many of you, but I'm going to ask a question. So, is that generally how your governance structures are in other agencies, that you have these fairly insular governance approaches? I see a lot of heads nodding. Right, I can stutter now. King's Speech has been out. Right? So yeah, that's how we did it too. And we'd been working on it for a couple of years, and then we got this urgency from our political leadership that this just wasn't a very effective model, and they actually gave me 7 weeks to come up with a new governance framework. And what we did is we looked at a bunch of best practices. We looked at some work from Gartner, some work from MIT, that looked at different kinds of governance decisions and the different kinds of situations where you use those governance decisions. And then we looked at different ways and so some of those different kinds of methods are, you can have an IT monarchy where you have one person who makes the decision. You can have federated groups. And it turns out that there are different models that work for different kinds of decisions. So for instance, if you're looking at infrastructure decisions, those are decisions that really, especially given the 25-point plan, really work best with an IT monarchy, where you have one CIO who makes those kinds of decisions for the infrastructure. But where you have mission investments, a more federated model really does make sense. And so we designed a new governance framework that breaks it into essentially 3 pieces. And it's convenient that these 3 pieces align to the kinds of segments that we talked about many years ago. The IT mission support, I'm going to butcher the names on it, but essentially the infrastructure things, back office services, and then mission services. And then broke down, or is in the process of breaking down, the framework certainly breaks down the bureau-specific IT governance boards and forms them around common mission function. So instead of each bureau figuring out how to do their financial, we put it under the departmental CFO. All of the CFO officers come together and they make their decisions. For mission areas, same kind of thing. We have multiple bureaus working in the same area. They come together and they make the decisions. One of the big challenges that we encounter with our governance board is that for any given governance decision, you have the majority of the people around the table aren't really equipped to answer, to make an informed opinion about a particular proposal. They just don't have that background. And so they defer to the executive who does know their program, and so we end up with a lot of status quo. So this was a framework that has been approved, and we are moving in that direction at DOI. Very excited about it. It can be very big for architecture and integrating capital planning into a much more focused portfolio direction. But I'll suggest it may be something you want to keep an eye on and see how it evolves in DOI, how this thing grows, and whether this is something that potentially can have impacts in other organizations as well. It's the kind of thing that we've been really trying to get in terms of architecture and capital planning integration, and it fits very neatly into this decision-making model where the people who actually know the issues associated with their particular IT arena can actually make those decisions.
Thank you. Anybody else on governance? John, you want to say anything?
I think Jim covered it well. I'd be curious about the IG's role in this, and we've got an IG on the table here, so I'll defer to Ben.
I'm not the IG. I do not audit or investigate anyone. However, every time I walk into the room, they say, There he is. He's here to audit us. No, but it is true that I do work for the IG. I operate and run the IT services for the Inspector General so that there's some separation of the investigation data and the audit data. For effective governance, we have had this issue in commerce for some time, and we're now succeeding at it because out of the departmental CIO's office and Office of Secretary, they stopped saying it's our way or the highway, because each of the bureaus have their own budget, and that doesn't work very well. What they have said is this all makes sense, the 25-point plan. So, because it came from all of you, and we all agree with it. So what we're going to do is say the goals of the Office of Secretary are that you do all of this stuff. And if a certain bureau is good at it in one area, like one bureau is really good at security, another one is good at data center consolidation, another one is good at another thing, you then go from the mission area and you get those services from them. You will also go to the policy area of the Office of Secretary and you check off that box. And the third part of the triangle is, well, your audit findings get resolved automatically because you're doing good management. So where you have overlap of doing reduction of weaknesses as well as following policy and meeting your mission, by doing one thing, you can get a lot of performance there. This past year, we put in a balanced scorecard commerce-wide, and it maps to a lot of these things, and it's also drilling down into each bureau's strategic plan, the 5-year plan. People's performance reviews, their annual performance reviews, mid-years are now updated to all of this, and we're moving the ship in a new direction, but it's a big ship to move.
I'd like to add on to that. I mean, the problem, no one wants to go to shared services because they're unique and special. And nobody's been more unique and special than IG shops. So is the IG willing to buy services from the rest of commerce?
Yes, we already are.
Good,
We are
good.
sitting in the Hoover building, and we get network services from the Office of Secretary. We're talking to NOAA about getting security services from them. We're talking to the Census Department about getting data center services from them. The IG shop is too small for us to staff 24/7, 365 data center and have a dozen data center employees. Also have another dozen security operations center employees. I mean, that 24 people is bigger than the entire IT staff. So yes, we already are getting network services from the Secretary, and we're looking at getting more shared services. And we're talking about how we can get those and maintain our confidentiality of our investigation and audit data. So watch the alarms coming into our network from, say, Secretary or NOAA, but don't actually look at the data that someone is trying to hack into.
And DOI is doing the same thing. The IG is moving into the same network. So that's very encouraging that what's traditionally thought of as such an insular kind of organization is buying into that shared approach. That's great.
That's an important message. I think very audible. That, and it's nothing most people are ever going to hear or know. That's good.
Yeah.
Very good news.
From DOT, we're actually backing into better governance. We started out about a year ago, and from the capital planning side. We knew this was coming, and again, federated, so we were trying to bring everybody together. So we put something together called an integrated program planning and management process. We rolled it out a year ago to the department and said, we've simplified capital planning. We've got it in 9 phases. We did a very structured approach, and everything that comes out of it, if you follow it, and it was very easy to follow, if you follow it, you'll meet the intent of everything that OMB wants from a capital planning standpoint. As the 25-point plan came out, we said, good, this gives us an opportunity to kind of do version 1.1. So we're plugging in a lot more EA into it so that we can instantiate this into the capital planning process, and it strengthens both of it. And part of what we're doing is we looked at our governance structure and said, this isn't working, because we have a lot of bodies, but no authority and no accountability with any of them. Nobody made a decision. So we're proposing to our CIO to basically blow it apart and have one group that deals with shared services and one that deals with infrastructure optimization. Make your decisions, and the infrastructure optimization would be the CIOs. You have the skin in the game for the common operating environment. You should be telling us what you need, optimizing it the best way, but make your decisions, kind of bury the TC or the TRB into it, talk about it at that level and fix it. Shared services, again, get the execs together and say, this is something for our, so that we can start to get the shared services that we need. Simplify things so that we don't go out and everybody has a business intelligence tool. Everybody has, a CUP system for their accounting or whatever. The way we're trying to do a holistic view on it now is to say, if we can set up policy, new governance structure, the process with updating the IPPM, get the tools and the training, and make sure that all of these things work together, then they strengthen each other, and you're not going to have these silos that, oh, we're doing architecture. Because what are we going to be doing 6 months from now? Everybody's going to be saying, well, the bloom's off the rose. And so we're trying to integrate them together so that we don't get into this, that we can keep the ball moving, and we get from I have an idea all the way through disposition, and there's always a process in place to move people through it, but to keep it all together so that things don't start falling apart, because we know budgets and just time, there will be less emphasis on certain aspects of it. So the more we bring it together and integrate it, the more we feel it supports the whole process.
Great.
I think that there's, just one quick thing, Phil. I think there is one thing that I'm seeing, certainly in DOI and several other agencies from conversations with several of you, is that there's less of an emphasis on compliance and more emphasis on bringing back sound management, going back to the root cause of why we have the requirements that we have, and really focusing on doing good management, and then with the expectation that the compliance piece comes out at the end. And maybe it doesn't come out in exactly the form in which it's being asked for, but that it does demonstrate due diligence and sound management practice, which to the credit of Scott Bernard, he's been very, very much flexible, demonstrated a lot of flexibility in terms of accepting alternative ideas and alternative ways to achieving the goals of improved management. So I think some of the things you were talking about, Brad, really looking at fundamentally improving the management practice so it's not just a temporary thing, so that it can be something that goes on and demonstrates results, and we're not just checking the boxes like sometimes we do.
Yeah. So one of the things that is really clear is that we've got some very smart people involved in federal IT, both the industry side and the government side. And Jim, your earlier offer to maybe share your framework, management framework with us, because not all of us are experts in everything, and so the ability to kind of share between ourselves best practices and new ideas is to me really beneficial. I want to talk a little bit about increased agency with increased engagement with industry. The last couple points in the 25-point plan. Parham, you'll notice here we're missing the important one: attend GTRA conferences twice per year. But clearly we are increasing engagement with industry here. Patrick, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, in GSA, that's a big thing for us. We offer contracts with that. Also interagency, so we have different blogs and things like that, the Better Buy project, and also an interagency PRP website that we're working with OMB on establishing that would hopefully goes back to how do we, streamline the acquisition process also, but also how, again, input. We see it's sometimes difficult, and the challenge we'd be interested in hearing is it doesn't seem like industry always shares openly with us their ideas. I mean, certainly there's secrets or, their competitive edge. So we'd like to hear how we could possibly do that, get past that. How can we all benefit from making those things? And so even though we put a website out there, we put a blog, we don't necessarily always get the contribution or the open dialogue that you're looking for. So we're looking for ways of how we can do that.
Okay. I want to give each of you a few minutes just to respond on your general overview of the 25-point plan, anything that I didn't really give you a chance to say. I'm going to start with you, Benjamin. Nothing?
No, like I said, we're excited about it because it gives us an opportunity to start to bring our disparate operating administrations together, looking for opportunities to share internally and improve processes, because like I said, right now, everybody's in a silo and it's very difficult to get them to share across the lines. So this gives us an opportunity, because we know the next step is Scott's going to push us to share agency to agency, not just within, operating administrations within. So we have to get our house in order first, and so we're trying to push that internally so that we're ready for the next steps.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add other than, there's, the more we move toward transparency, the more demand there's going to be that what's flowing through the pipes work, it's accurate, it's current, and I think we can play a pivotal role in helping bring people together. That's, I do think we need to not just talk to us. I mean, we do like to come together and have our discussions, but the harder part is just, talking to other people. And so I think we need to keep our eyes there.
Patrick?
No, I'm good.
Jim?
Well, I think you've probably heard quite enough from me, but Phil, you've been avoiding questions for this panel, and so you're from OMB, and I know you've got a lot of visibility through Max and some things like that. I'm wondering if you have anything that you can share with us about your perspectives and any insights that you have on this.
Sure. A little broad picture and then a shameless plug for my tools. The shifting budget scenario, to me, really makes these things more critical. If I give you lots of money and tell you just go solve your problem, you'll just go solve your problem. If I give you a little teeny tiny bit of money and tell you just go solve your problem, you'll yell and scream for a little bit, and then you'll call John and ask him what tools he has, or you call Patrick and ask him how you can better participate in what other people are doing. And that's really what we want to be doing. So I think the reduced budgets actually gives us some advantage, especially enterprise architecture community and shared services folks. The shameless plug, Max Federal Community, I was here a couple years ago, I talked to you about what we've done for the budget community. We had about 25,000 users at the time. The entire budget community is only about 5,000 users, so most of those users were people in the management or eGov or other communities who had discovered the tools. We're about 45,000 users now, and so we've got a lot of government-wide usage. Vivek kind of forced us to do a usability improvement. So those of you who used it 3 years ago and said, man, this is clunky, which is, Vivek loved that word. We're not clunky anymore. We're much cleaner. We're providing authentication services to a bunch of agencies. I've got 12, 13 systems, some pretty high profile that are using Max for authentication, and we added PivCard, HSPD 12 to that, and so I've had several of you call me in the last couple weeks saying, hey, how am I going to get to HSPD 12? Can I use Max authentication services to that? We do a lot in data collection and analytics. And then just recently, Max shared desktop or Max virtual desktop, we've got a a desktop that in the cloud that we kind of created so that we could edit documents together within the budget community. But it seems like it probably has some other useful areas in terms of work at a distance and other things. So I'm excited about the tools. I'm excited about what the budget community can do with them, and very eager to share with the rest of the federal government. Parham, do we have any time for questions?
Just because I like you guys, I'll give time for one question. All right.
My question is on the whole government-industry collaboration. I think the procurement shops are going to probably have to set some rules or provide some guidance for that, because if I have pre-RFP collaboration and I'm collaborating with multiple vendors, one vendor is going to win the RFP and the other vendor is going to be upset or protest. So how do we have collaboration without violating any procurement or divulging any procurement sensitive information?
You want to tackle that?
That's a great question. But I think the standard approach that we take is that as long as all the information and the questions is available to everybody, then it's an open, competitive environment. So that's in general. So, I mean, that's saying the absolute rule, but I think you get in trouble with when either how you write a statement of work, or once you start getting to selection of only a few industries, or not industries, companies, that's where you get more in trouble with those discussions. To counter that, what we're trying to do is how do you get all of industry involved in the first set of questions, and then you're going there. So there's not as many questions when you're doing it. But it is. I mean, there's lots of rules. And we said not all the rules are keeping up with how fast things are going, or even, new technologies. And it's tough even for companies out there. So like, Google's now a big player in federal government. They're trying to do it, but they haven't really ever done business with government before. So, how do you do those things where you have companies who've done it for a long time and they know the ins and outs? I don't know. We're trying to do that. We're trying to get feedback. So if anybody out there has the answer, please let us know.
And I would say watch the Mythbusters campaign, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and watch what the acquisition community is doing on this. It's a hard question, but we absolutely believe that it's right to engage industry, and GSA, OMB, the federal acquisition community are really working hard on solving this problem. Part of this is understanding the rules, getting us all to understand the rules better, and so keep an eye on where that goes. Parham, Kelly, thank you. GTRA, you guys are great.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Panelists, thank you very much.